welcome to the Open Conversations podcast, a show about personal and professional development. And here we share practical tips and strategies, plus stories to help you define success on your own terms. And of course, if you want to be the best version of yourself and loves real talk, you definitely want to listen in. This week, or should I say, there's one lesson that I've learned basically over the years, and it's that, the things that helps you to get ahead in your career or business isn't basically taught in school. And so whether you are a company or you work in a company or you own the company, you'll definitely want to listen into this episode as you're going to learn tactical tips to manage your career, activate your expert brand, and of course, maximize your impact. Hopefully, in a way that you'll be able to realize your full potential. And of course, I want you to go ahead and grab your drink, get a pen on paper, because our guest today is going to share some secret sauce to help you definitely get ahead. And so in our guest seat today, we have Dave Liu, who is an advisor, author, entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, you name it, with over 30 years of veteran Wall Street and Silicon Valley experience. Over 15 billion for, raised over 15 billion for companies, right? Created multiple startups, multiple $1 billion exits. I know you're currently working on several projects right now, and you're here to basically bring your experience to help, our audience learn a few things that's going to help them get ahead, land that interview, promote themselves, and basically get paid their worth. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for agreeing to come on. Okay, so to get started, I've been, reading a bit about you and stuff, and I first want you to get a little bit into telling us a bit about your personal story. You're Asian American, and of course, you were born a cleft baby. Tell us a bit about your story and how that influenced who you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in the US, but I actually grew up in Asia. And when you add it all up, I spent about a third of my life in Asia, but 2/3 in the US. And why I think that's important is that for about a third of my life, I was not the minority. I grew up in an environment where most people look like me. And people of Chinese descent were the majority in Hong Kong. And it was really only until I got to the US where, I started to really appreciate this notion of minority versus majority and what the implications are from a career standpoint. So I think that's one major thing I wanted to just highlight because, I think obviously if you're a minority, a person of color in America, you certainly have certain hurdles and disadvantages that the majority in power don't have.
And that's definitely true.
And I was able to navigate that despite being a minority in America. The other major thing that happened to me, as you alluded to, is that I was born with a cleft. I was actually born with 4 clefts. So if you took a spectrum of people with clefts, I was definitely on the very high percentile of people that had a major birth difference at birth.
Right.
And just to give you a sense of what that meant was that I was born with a massive hole in the center of my face and 2 clefts inside my palate and 2 in front were not fused. So for a good amount of time, my mother had to feed me with a dropper, and until probably the age around 5, I wasn't even on the curve, if you will, in terms of height and weight, because malnutrition is actually one of the biggest challenges for cleft babies. It's actually the reason why if a cleft baby is not treated and a cleft person is not treated, the mortality rate is around 90% up until the age of 18 or 19. So the good and bad of it, however, is that it's highly treatable. The challenge is that it requires a lot of treatment. It requires an entire village, frankly.
Right.
And so for me, up until the age of 18, I had 11 craniofacial surgeries, so full on invasive stuff going on in my head, and numerous trips to the hospital and to the doctor. So while other people were probably out there playing ball and having a good time, my spare time, if you will, was spent going to the doctor and going to the hospital. But I
Right.
say that, and I say this to all of the people that are cleft affected, many of whom I mentor and I try to give words of encouragement, is that I actually don't look at it as a curse. I actually look at it as a blessing.
Right.
And I think that many, many years later, what I realized was that having a birth difference, or frankly, having any major difference at birth of any type, I think tends to steel you, tends to make you stronger, if you will, because you either have to accept that, perhaps you got the bad roll of the dice and you have all these liabilities, or you have to figure out how to turn them into assets. You got to figure out how do you leverage some of these things that perhaps in certain situations people would look at as a disability. How do you leverage those into advantages? And for me, this wasn't by any means orchestrated or calculated, but one of the things that I realized in hindsight was that being born with a facial difference, where you're teased, you're viewed as an outsider, you're definitely somebody who looks down on the ground, not holding your head up high.
Right.
What that leads to is incredible grit, incredible thick skin, if you will. And I developed that. I developed that throughout my younger years, and throughout my adult life. And what I found was that became essentially a superpower when it came to the business world.
Right.
Because when I went into the business world, particularly when you're working in environments where the stakes are very high, compensation's high, if things go wrong, a lot of people lose their jobs, and that certainly describes environments like Wall Street and Silicon Valley. What I found was that my upbringing and my ability to take a lot of crap, frankly,
Right.
really helped me a lot.
Right.
And particularly as I was rising the corporate ladder on Wall Street, there wasn't a day that went by where I wasn't stressed out about something. Clients, when you're talking about multi-million dollar, if not billion-dollar situations, they want to know that you're going to deliver. And there's a lot of pressure on you from clients, from your boss, from the people that work for you.
Yeah.
And I think that growing up the way I grew up helped me to be relatively even keeled. I like to joke that, I had rhino skin. I had skin that was as tough as a rhino, and I developed a very low heartbeat. I'm kind of a low heartbeat guy. I don't get too excited
Right.
when stuff goes wrong. And I think that really helped me a lot during my career. So
Okay.
I would say that if I were to isolate two key things in my personal upbringing that helped me a lot in my career, one was, as I said earlier, being a minority, but not growing up feeling like a minority. So really thinking of myself as someone that has no inherent disadvantage, if you will, and
Right.
frankly, not having a chip on my shoulder as well. And then two, the birth difference, I think, really endowed me with the ability to take a lot of stress and a lot of challenges and soldier through them.
Right. And I can understand that. Of course, I'm an immigrant. I was not born here in the States. And of course, when you come from the Caribbean, and when you come, of course, it's a whole different atmosphere. You're learning things. It's almost like starting over. So I can understand, when you said, coming from where you were a majority, and then, to a place where you are now more a minority. And I get that. And just to speak a little bit about, turning perceived or inherent disadvantages into advantages. That was actually one of the questions I had for you. Because, especially going out in the career world, a lot of times, even when it comes to newbies and new professionals coming out of school, new grads and stuff, a lot of times they, have these perceived, especially in these underrepresented groups, perceived limitations and perceived, weaknesses, how do they turn those into assets?
So I think every person is different. And I think one of the key things is first, I think is a state of mind.
Uh-huh.
And this is just my personal opinion, which is the following, which is the world is rigged. The world is what it is. There are situations where you're going to be the minority, you're going to have a disadvantage, and you can accept that, or you can fight it. And I always choose to fight. I choose to figure out, how do I take a situation that may not be ideal and make it ideal for myself? And so for me, one of the things that I thought long and hard about was, okay, I'm a minority and I've got these massive scars on my face.
Right.
I don't know how much more of a disadvantage you can have from a visual standpoint, right? Obviously, the color of your skin is something that's visual, but
Right.
when you have a lot of scars, what ends up happening is you essentially become like a human car crash. You become the person that people just can't stop staring at you and wondering, I wonder what happened to this guy. Did
Right.
he get in a car crash? Did he end up in a bar fight? Like, what happened to this guy? And what ends up happening is that that becomes your narrative. That becomes how people define you, right? And a lot of what I'm saying, I think, is universal when you are not the majority, when you are a woman or a person of color, right? In America, let's face it, right? If you're a woman or a person of color in a corporate environment, you're most of the time you're a minority, and most
Right.
of the time your gender and your skin color become the narrative by which people define you until you change that narrative, right? So
Right.
for me, obviously the ethnic background and my birth difference were the narrative for me. But something happened, which actually I knew from growing up, which was that people would always notice me. In many ways, I became quite memorable. I became that guy that people say, "Oh yeah, we don't have that many Chinese guys in this room, but like, there's that one Chinese guy there." And I'm also pretty big. I'm 6 foot. I'm over
Okay.
200 pounds, right? So I'm not like a little guy, if you will, right?
So you
And then
stand out.
yeah, and then when you add the facial scars, right? It's kind of like, yeah, oh, I remember that guy, right? And so what I realized was that when I was younger and I was rising up the corporate ladder, one of the things that's really critical is to stand out.
Right.
If you don't get the attention, then you already lost the battle, right?
Right.
And so what I thought about was, okay, if I'm going to be looked at anyway, if I'm going to be the center of attention anyway, because of my ethnic background and because of my birth difference, then how do I leverage that so that I'm not remembered as that Chinese guy with scars, but
Right.
that smart Chinese guy with scars, right? That capable Chinese guy with scars. And so I would prepare religiously for every meeting, any interaction I had with anyone that was important, whether it be my boss or a meeting with the clients. And I would always try to rehearse and prepare one smart thing to say in that meeting. And unless my boss told me to shut my trap and say, "Hey, you're not allowed to say anything," I would always say something, no matter what. And
Definitely.
what I found over time was that started to accrue, kind of like a bank account with interest.
Right.
People started to say, "Oh yeah, I remember that guy. Yeah, he had that one thing that he said that was pretty intelligent, or he added some value, or he got something
Right.
done for me." And slowly but surely, you get reinvited to meetings, and people
Right.
don't look at you as dead weight. They look at you as someone that can actually add value.
Yeah, you
So
try to build an equity.
exactly, you're building equity, you're growing your equity. So I give the same advice to someone, regardless of whether they have a birth difference or not. If you are different, you're going to stand out, right? And if you are, try to figure out how to use that to your advantage. And so that's one of the major ways that I was able to turn what I think most people would look as a liability and turn it into an asset. But going back full circle to your original question, I think we all have to look in our inside and determine what is unique about me. right? What are
Right.
the elements of me that make me unique? And then how do I take those and accentuate them? And
Right.
ultimately, most people in the corporate world are interested in hiring and surrounding themselves with people that add value. And so I think as long as you're thinking about, are there things about me where I can add value and differentiate? And if
Right.
so, those are the situations where I need to lean forward and I need to make an impression. Because if I recede into the background, nobody's going to remember you. And
Right.
we never promote people that we don't remember.
Definitely. I say bring your lived experiences and show how that can, like you said, add value in the situation. Okay, awesome. So I know over the years, you have achieved much success and, of course, made piles of money, I'm sure. And you have taken all of that experience and put that into this new book, your best-selling book, The Way of the Wall Street Warrior. First of all, I love the name, The Way of the Wall Street Warrior. And of course, to conquer the corporate game using tips, tricks, and smart cuts. And I like that, smart cuts. Okay. And you basically, from what I've heard and what I've seen, your whole idea about this book was to help underestimated people get hired, of course, help them get ahead and teach them ways in which they can thrive in not just in the industry that you are in, but also in corporate world across the board. Tell us a bit about how the book came about.
Sure. So one of the things that I noticed in my own career when I rose up to the managing director and co-head level on Wall Street was that there were very, very few minorities.
Right.
At the firm I was at, I was one of the very few minorities at that level, and there were very few women as well. And when you look at Wall Street today, and you look at some of the data in 2022, among some of the top firms, it's still 80% white men. So there's
Right.
clearly not a lot of diversity at the top. There's a lot of diversity at the junior level now, and I think largely it's because society has kind of pushed them towards that.
Right.
But there isn't a lot of emphasis among these companies, and I'm talking about all industries, to help minorities
Yes.
and women kind of actually rise to the C-suite.
Right.
And so that, coupled with the fact that I have two boys, and I recognize that the key to happiness is frankly to feel appreciated at work, because we spend the vast majority of our lives working. And I think this is part of the reason why the vast majority of people are actually unhappy, because they're undertitled or undercompensated at work or underappreciated. That led me to think about what was it unique about my experience that I can pass on to my two boys, because as a good dad, which I hope I am, I don't want them to be unhappy. I don't want them to
Right.
lead lives where they join the other, 70, 80% of Americans who don't like their work. uh,
Yes.
and so I started to write down all these things that I did unique to me that I didn't learn at two of the top business schools, which I went to. I didn't learn at the hundreds of hours of HR training and leadership training I've been forced to take in my life.
Right.
And so I started writing down things like, what are the things that I did to make an impression? What are the things I did to get that job, get that project, get hired? What were the things that I did to negotiate my compensation? What are the things I did to get that last brass ring, to get the managing director level, the partner level, that really, really tough final job, if you will. And I started writing this down in what I joke was a, kind of 50-page manifesto. And it was mostly chicken scratch and bullet points and just tactical things that I did. And what happened was that during the pandemic, a friend of mine reached out to me who was a best-selling author, and we were just catching up. And I told him about this project that I've been working on for years, and I was starting to brush it up because as I get older, I started to forget some of the things that I did in corporate
Right.
America. And so he asked me to send it over. He said, "Hey, let me take a look at it." So I sent it over to him. He looked at it and he said, "Hey, this could be a book. Like, this could really help a lot of people, particularly people that feel underrepresented in the workforce, which is, frankly, most women, if not all women, and people of color." And so ultimately, I decided to move forward and go through the gargantuan task of taking this chicken scratch and turn it into a book, because I felt I could wrap the whole thing into a philanthropic project.
Right.
And I felt that I could help a lot of people by sharing what I've done and give them some tactical advice and effectively spread happiness, right? Because, like I said earlier, people are fundamentally unhappy, I think, because they're unhappy at work.
Right.
And then also I could raise money for charity by giving all the proceeds from the book to charity, and then raise awareness for these charities that are important to me. So
Wow.
that's
Awesome.
ultimately what led to me deciding, you know what, I'm going to write this book and let's see what happens. And so
Awesome.
that's how the whole thing came about.
And I like that. I like that you have basically decided, to take this and also not just help people, but who purchased the book, but also from the proceeds, then that also goes to support these causes that you basically try to uplift. Okay, and you touched on a couple of other things that, of course, we're going to discuss, and you touched on the fact that, of course, a lot of people are unhappy at work. We're hearing this talk about the Great Resignation and stuff, and of course, for me, I think that speaks to the fact that workplace readiness these days is not just must include workplace wellness, and because a lot of people are not happy at work, senior management. You've been in senior management, you've been at the top of your industry. What one strategy do you think senior management can employ, and how important do you think that, of course, that wellness in the workplace is to business success?
I think the fundamental thing that senior management can do, which is not easy, by the way,
Uh-huh.
is to understand your employees on the individual level and figure out what are their motivations.
Hmm.
What are they incented by? There is a business school term, if you will, a business school framework that says that thou shalt not have any more than 6 to 12 direct reports.
Right.
And, I reflected on that when I learned that at business school. And I don't think I ever got the straight answer to why is that? Why is it that the number of direct reports should stay 6 to 12? And, the academics will say, well, it's, because you only have a certain span of control. And, if you have too many direct reports, then you're not really managing anybody. Right. And I agree with all that. But I think that fundamentally, one of the things that I did, and albeit I didn't do a great job at this, but I tried to do this, is there's only so many people that you can really get to know well and really understand what are their individual motivations, and then create incentives to get the best out of them. And I'll give myself as an example. So in my early 20s, what motivated me more than anything else was making money,
Right.
because I was at poverty in college and I had $100,000 in school debt and I needed to make money fast. So if you think about my motivation and my incentive, and that being a lever, if you will, for senior management, I was pretty easy to manage, because all you need to do was put this carrot in front of me and say, like, okay, if you work X amount and you deliver X amount of productivity, we will pay you this. And if
Right.
you do better, we'll pay you more. Right. And that was great. That was great throughout my 20s. And I would say it was pretty effective throughout my 30s. But then when I turned 40 and I started to think about moving out of the industry and retiring and doing something else, I remember when I first told my boss, my direct boss, that I was going to retire and leave the business. And this was when I turned 40. He was completely shocked. It was almost like, he didn't even know who I was. It was like, you must be possessed. And in fact, they gave me time to take a sabbatical because they thought that, okay, Dave is clearly deranged.
Right.
So why don't we let him go take some time off to go find himself, to go do a
And then come back.
walkabout. Yeah, whatever he needs to do to get it out of his system, and he'll be back. And
Right.
so, I took him up on it. And after a month, I came back and I said, guys, look, I'm leaving. Like, yes, it was very gracious of you to let me have a little time to go do my walkabout, but like, I'm out, I'm done. And I reflect back on that experience where they were so surprised. And I think part of it was they never invested in really figuring out what motivates me. And they still thought of me as that 20-year-old Dave Liu. not the
Right.
40-year-old Dave Liu. And
Right.
I think that's where the vast majority of senior management screws up, because they don't keep tabs on their direct reports. They don't keep tabs on their employees to really figure out what motivates them. Because I think if you don't figure out what motivates employees, and you have the same incentive structure for them, that's how they get disaffected. That's how they end up in a situation where they go like, you know what, like this job is not for me. I've made it. I've told you, or I've implied that it's not about the money. It's
Right.
about being respected, right? It's about doing meaningful work, right?
Right.
And the organization just
Family.
hasn't
Yes.
delivered that. And so I'm out of here. And
Right.
I see this vicious circle time and time again. And I do believe it's because senior management has an obligation to invest in the people below them. And I'm not talking about money. I'm actually talking about get to know them, because every single person is different, as I mentioned earlier, as well as we all change over time. And
Yes.
I think unless you invest in your people, you're going to get caught unawares. And I see it all the time.
Right. And then of course you lose your talent to someone else because you
Yeah,
didn't invest in them.
because that other firm has, that other company delivers upon the right incentive mechanism that motivates your employee at that point in their time. And they're
Right.
not finding the same incentives at your company.
Right. Definitely.
And again, if you don't stay on top of this, it's like mold. Like it grows and grows, and before you know it, oh my God, the house is condemned.
Right. Definitely. Because you hadn't been paying attention, and before you know it, yeah, definitely. And I can understand that. And that's, the whole conversation about the great resignation. I like I said, I can understand a lot of, and especially with the pandemic and stuff, people had time to reassess and figure out what is important to them, whether you make a lot of money or a little money, and figuring out, wait a minute, this is not worth it. I need to do something that's going to be more purposeful in my life, or something that's going to allow me to spend time with the people that I love the most, or whatever that may be. And so I think, it is a great opportunity for, employers to reassess this whole landscape of benefits and taking care of your employees.
And I think you have to be a lot more proactive
Uh-huh.
with the rise of hybrid workforces and the pandemic, because you don't have the serendipity that we used to have when you were all kind of walking around the office and someone says to you, hey, how's it going? Oh, it's going all right. Why don't we go grab a coffee at Starbucks and let's sit down and just tell me how it's going, right? You don't have that anymore. So you have to actually be really proactive and actually procedural about it. You have to say, hey, can we do a Friday check-in every week on Zoom? It's just so I know how you're doing. And are you working on projects you want? Is this job still what you thought it would be or not?
Right.
And
Definitely.
that's also difficult, right? Because I think we tend to be a lot more revealing in social settings. And when you're logging onto a Zoom link with your boss, right? That's probably the most antisocial thing you can think of, right? It's like, okay, I'm ready for battle, right? I'm ready to present.
Right. But I think if they've created a culture where you make your your employee or your people feel welcome, then I think, because there are companies who are doing it, so I think it is possible to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just harder, I think, than
Okay.
when you're all mulling around in the office break room or having lunch together, right, in a casual setting.
Yeah, I think if anything, I think what the pandemic had done is basically just force the change a lot faster, because the change was coming. It was just a matter of it now being forced on a little faster, because 80% of work can be done from home. But I think the change was just, forced and had more people thinking, oh, wait a minute, we have to think more hybrid. We have to embrace technology a bit more. It's a love-hate relationship, but it can help, we can actually use it to our advantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And speaking of technology, so we're going to touch on, the whole idea of interviewing in this new dynamics, this world. And if one thing that I like to tell people, we're all in the business of sales. I've heard people say, I don't like sales, but I tell everyone, you're in the business of sales. When you go out seeking, looking for a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, you're selling yourself. You know, regardless of what you're doing, you're selling. When you're applying to the college, you're selling yourself, whatever it is. So we're all in the business of sales. And I think as you know, being in sales, it's all about also learning how to read the room. Because if you're talking to the girl and you know she's not feeling you, you got to be able to read that and be able to respond to that. Likewise in business. And so I feel like, you know, of course, with the new change in the hiring process, being able to read the room, whether it is in person or when you're doing, you know, whether it's a Zoom virtually, that of course is important in the dynamics of things. And how important do you think that is? Of course, I know, of course, in marketing, it is important to know your audience and be able to read. In sales, it is important. So how important do you think it is to the regular job seeker or professional?
I think it's everything. And I always counsel young people that I mentor, if you're going to invest in any one skill or trait that will propel you throughout your entire life, that's salesmanship. That's being able to figure out, how do I convince someone to trust me with their life if they're going to work for me, with their money if they're a customer, with investor if they're going to invest in my company. And so I think it's absolutely critical to be able to figure out how you become an effective salesperson. And
Right.
I was not good at it, honestly. Like when I was first a junior person, I was your typical kind of like gearhead. I was good at cranking numbers and looking at stuff. And I never really understood the importance of salesmanship. And I think part of it is also that society, when you think about it, we don't actually put it at the top of the pedestal. In
Right.
fact, we kind of put it down the bottom. What we do is we say, yeah, you know, you go study in school and you learn hard science and you learn the humanities. We would never offer a course on salesmanship because that's kind of lowbrow. Like we're not an infomercial. We are a university. We are a school of higher education.
Right.
And so I think a lot of us are forced to learn salesmanship in the real world, or we're just really bad at it. And I
Right.
think part of the reason why many of us are really bad at it is that we don't practice it.
Yes.
One of the things that I'm always shocked by is that people in the corporate world actually don't practice their job. And when you tell someone to practice their job, even today, they look at you like you're crazy.
It
Like,
feels, yeah, and it feels weird to them, even though it's something they do.
yeah, they go like, what are you talking about? Right. And I always tell them, you realize that Steve Jobs, who was the CEO of Apple, and I think arguably known as probably one of the best presenters of all time, particularly in the corporate setting,
Right.
he would practice his presentations religiously over and over and over and over again. And I will tell you that in my career, where I worked with hundreds of CEOs in helping them sell their companies and raise capital, very few of them ever practiced their presentations. Even though I would tell them, I say, hey, look, you got to practice. Yeah. I got this. Don't worry about it. No, I'm telling you, practice. And then sure enough, when we have some high stakes meeting with an investor, you know, they fumble, they make a mistake, and you're like, oh, I told you to practice. Yeah. Get out of my face, right?
Right.
And so I always say the same thing to people that are looking for a job or rising the corporate ladder, which is practice and practice salesmanship, because reading a room and figuring out how to close a deal, how to get someone to hire you is really hard. And you need to learn the cues from that individual person in order to figure out like what's working. And so for me, what I did when I was mid-level was that I would constantly book additional meetings if I was in a different city and had a little bit of extra time. And I would book meetings with what I call low stakes situations where, you know, if I screwed up that meeting, it's not a big deal. Like nobody's going to get fired.
But you were getting the practice in. You were getting that daily practice. Yeah.
Over and over. And I'll tell you, Nicole, the first couple of times I did it, I was terrible. Like I would do what other people do, right? So one of the jokes in investment banking on Wall Street is that a banker without a pitch book is a naked banker, because
Wow.
a pitch book, usually a really big one, is your
Uh-huh.
weapon of choice
Right.
if you're trying to convince clients to hire you. So
Right.
when I was a young guy, I would do the same thing all the old guys did. Okay, here's my 100-page pitch book. Boom, put it on the table, right? And then I'd be talking to a CEO who has no time for anything, let alone meet with some young banker, and I start leafing through it, right?
Right.
I go, and look at all this amazing analysis I did. Look how smart I am, right? Blah, 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 right? And I didn't read the cues, but like 9 times out of 10, like I was boring them to tears.
Right.
And I stopped and thought about it after a couple of times. I'm like, I'm never getting invited back. Like nobody wants to meet with me again. Like something is not working. And so I changed it up. I decided after a while, you know what? I'm not going to bring a pitch book. Or if I have a pitch book, I just do it as a leave behind, right? I'm not going to open it up. And I'm going to get into a conversation. And I'm going to spend a lot more time listening than talking. And over time, I started to hone my pitch. And it actually obviously became pretty good because, I was able to win clients and generate revenue and get promoted. So
Right.
I would say absolutely learning how to interview, how to sell yourself is critical, and practice it. Practice it. Start with your dog or your cat.
Right.
Practice with them first, right? Then do it with loved ones. Do it with your significant other, with your parents, with your brothers, with your siblings, with your best friend, right? And you'd be surprised how much you learn by just practicing. And then over time, what will happen is you'll have the whole shtick down. You'll have this whole routine down, and it'll be really easy. And
And
you'll
then
know
you'll be
that.
able to now bring your authentic self to that.
Absolutely. And you'll be able to pick up on like, okay, this is not resonating, so I got to cut it off here, right? Or
Definitely.
they're really into this story about me, so I'll keep going on this
Keep
thread.
going on this, right? So being able to read that, definitely. Okay, that's awesome. And we're gonna go back a little bit because we talked about women in the workplace, and of course, being in the underrepresented groups. And of course, Wall Street and Silicon Valley, where you spend a massive amount of your time, have historically been more male dominated and still is greatly so. And how important do you think that representation, especially in those arenas, are? And I mean, we already talked a bit about, some strategies, what you think can be done, in terms of helping, people in the workplace, especially when it comes to those underrepresented. But what do you think, how important do you think representation is to that? And also, how do you think women in the workplace can master cognitive biases to be able to win in those fields?
Yeah. So on the first one, I'm actually going to address that without even getting into what's the right thing to do. Okay. So the right thing to do is obviously we should be more reflective of society, right? Companies should be more reflective of the diversity of the world, right?
Right.
Now there's going to be people that probably are listening to that and go like, yeah, whatever, right? Like, why don't you do that on your own time, right? That the companies are not a charity, okay? And to those people, I say, well, you know what? It does matter to your bottom line, and let me tell you why. The world is moving so quickly, and there's a key tenet of business that is so critical in order to make sure that you not only grow your business, but also not get your lunch eaten by somebody else and being surprised by a competitor. And unfortunately, we see this time and time again throughout corporate history. There was some company that pioneered a market, became the behemoth, and then slowly but surely, some startup or some other companies started to eat their lunch. And everybody's kind of looking at this car crash in slow motion, and they're wondering, like, how did this happen? how did we get in this position where we were the 800-pound gorilla, and now we're completely irrelevant? And this evolution, if you will, I think started with technology companies, but now that we know and have seen that technology is so pervasive across the entire economy and is an accelerant across multiple industries, I think you're seeing this across multiple sectors.
Right.
And what I've found in my career is that the main reason why companies get caught effectively unawares by a competitor is because they lose touch with their customer. They lose touch with the people who actually buy their products. And there is a really easy way to lose touch with your customer it's when you aren't the customer.
Right.
And if you look at the demographics of America, right, and we'll just focus on America for now,
Right.
It is rapidly becoming a multicultural society. It already is, but like we're certainly getting to points where if you add up all the minorities in America, they'll be bigger than the majority.
Right.
And we've already determined through data and whatnot that when you look at households, it's primarily women that determine where households spend their money.
Right.
And so I think that from a business standpoint, it makes a ton of sense for your organization to be reflective of your customer. Because if you don't know your customer, that's how you get caught. That's how you get your lunch eaten by somebody else.
Right.
Now, the other additional point I want to make on this representation is that there's another general rule of thumb that has worked really well for companies, which is you don't necessarily want a organization where it is a monarchy and you have the senior people delegating down to the bottom and telling everybody what to do, right? But you also don't want to have an organization where all the junior people are running around and they're the ones defining the strategy, because then you have chaos. And so generally what you find in the business world is that you want to have a blend of both. You want to have some top down and you want to have some bottoms up. Right. And so when you look at most of corporate America today, there's actually a good amount of diversity at the junior level now. I think it's frankly been a big push just in the last couple of years, but there's definitely a lot more diversity, but there's not a lot at the top. And so for this model to be sustainable, you have to have senior leadership that's also diverse. Because what's going to happen is if you don't have that diversity, there's just going to be constant tension between the two, where the junior people are saying, hey, we should be looking at this new market because Hispanic women are buying a lot of this detergent, right? Or we should be investing in more Asian men and marketing to them because they want to buy this certain type of car, right? And if all of your senior leaders are not the customer and they're not reflective of the workforce, they're going to be saying like, yeah, I don't get it, man. Like, I don't know why anybody would be interested in this product. And then over time, what's going to happen? It becomes a vicious circle. Your best people who feel like their voice is not being heard, they're going to leave. They're going to, I'm out of here. This is not what I thought it would be. The incentives are all screwed up, right? And you don't understand what I'm motivated by, right? Going full circle to our original conversation. And before you know it, the company gets its lunch eaten by somebody else. So I think that it's really important, not only because it's the right thing to do, but I actually think it makes strong business sense as well.
Business sense, definitely. So I'm going to ask you, wrapped into one, if you were given a chance to go back and speak to your 19-year-old self, coming out of college, just starting your career, because I know you started out, 19, and this is for, those new grads coming out of college, graduating, and I'm just getting started. What advice would you give that 19-year-old or give your 19-year-old self back then?
Yeah, so I am a big believer, as you now know, around thinking about what are your motivations, what are your incentives, and thinking about how do you achieve what you want to achieve in life by understanding what you're incented by and what will drive you. Now, when I was younger, I needed money badly, so my incentive system was pretty simple, and I was motivated by that to get out of poverty as fast as I could. If I could go back and I could wave a magic wand at the same time and alleviate some of that financial pressure, so I could be a little bit more holistic about what I wanted to do, then what I would tell myself is I would actually tell myself, look, Dave, if you want to lead a fulfilling life, you got to think about not only making money, but some of the other key questions that are important to answer. And I live by now a Japanese framework called the Ikigai framework. And the Ikigai framework is, I think, a really good way to think about what's your purpose. What do you strive for? And what you try to do is you try to answer 4 questions. And if the answer is the same for all 4, then you hold on to that answer as long as you can, because you've found your life's purpose. And that is, what are you passionate about? What are you good at? what does society value, and what will society actually pay for? Because there's things that society won't pay for. And so I would go back and tell myself, don't ever settle. Try to find the answer to those 4 questions. And if you don't find it, keep looking. Because I think that's really the key to having a purposeful life, and therefore a happy life, where you do something you're passionate about, right? So you go the extra mile. You're good at it, so you feel good about it, right? You don't end up in a vicious circle where you're passionate about something but you're not good at it. Right? It's something that society and your friends and your family appreciate. They go, yeah, I love the fact that Dave does the following, and then you're able to get paid for it, because there's a lot of things in life that you might be passionate about and you're good at and society values, but society won't pay you for it. So it's really hard to make a living. So that's what I would tell myself going back to my younger self. I would say, find the answers to those 4 questions and don't settle until you find it.
Definitely. Okay. So what does, if you should strip away everything, all the professional accolades and everything, who is Dave Liu?
I'm just a guy trying to make a mark in the universe somehow and leave this place a little better than when I got here.
Right.
And so I've been blessed. I had a tough start, but things are looking pretty good now. I worked really hard for a really long time so that I'd have the flexibility to do whatever I want.
Right.
And the last couple of years have been about being a fantastic father, to my 2 boys, experimenting with entrepreneurship and starting a bunch of companies and trying lots of different things, investing in people that I admire and think could do amazing things, and then giving a lot back to society. I wrote this book to help people that are underrepresented break the ceilings. I've also helped grow a news site for Asian Americans, because I believe that a lot of our stories are not being reported unless they're frankly really egregious and really traumatic. And I don't want that to be our sole narrative. Like, that's not a great narrative to begin with, right? So I'm trying to help on the news site, and then I'm focused on trying to get more representation of Asian Americans in entertainment through donations, through production companies that I've invested in and sit on the board of, as well as creating a new company that is doing NFT campaigns for underrepresented filmmakers. So I'm definitely in a mode where I'm trying to singularly leave this place a little bit better, and hopefully I'm still here for a really long time, but leave this place a little better and do it in ways that I know that I can make a small dent, if you will, in those small areas.
Yeah, I definitely understand that, because I feel like today my mission right now is to focus more and giving voice to underrepresented people, business, and causes that will help to help them to be able to achieve those goals. And I'm making that a big part of what I do, so that I can leave, like you said, this world a better place for my girls. I got 2 girls, and I try to instill certain things into them, and I see them duplicating that. So of course, for me, I want to make sure that I'm leading by example and being able to leave this place a better place for them. Okay, I do appreciate you taking the time to sit with us and talk. And tell our audience how they can reach you and how they can connect with you.
Yeah, so the easiest way is just go to my website. It's lucrative.com. So it's play on my last name, LIUCRATIVE.com. You can find me there. You can send me an email. I answer all my emails. So that's probably the easiest. I'm definitely on all the social media as well, but if you want to reach out to me directly, that's probably the easiest.
Awesome. Great. And thank you, Mr. Dave Liu. I appreciate your time. I thank you for pulling up a seat and coming here to share your story, to help our audience cultivate confidence, overcome fear, and of course, define success on their own terms. Again, thank you. And I appreciate you dropping in.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for having me today.